welcome everyone. Thank you to all of our friends, clients, acquaintances who have joined us today. Thank you especially to our guests from CFAR. Thanks to Sarah for helping coordinate this and Caleb for coming to speak. We're going to start with, I will give a quick intro about Imperial. Then I'll give a quicker intro about CFAR and Caleb, and then let him go into a little more detail about his background as well as that of the firm. And then we're looking forward to an engaging conversation with Caleb. And we'll probably stop for Q&A at some point in the middle, and we'll definitely try to leave time for Q&A at the end. All right, without further ado. Hello everyone. I am Gershom Margolis. I am the founder of Imperial Advisory. We're a team of former CFOs and financial executives who serve as part-time CFOs and consultants for businesses that need strategic financial leadership, but don't need a full-time CFO. As I'll mention in a moment, we also work with businesses that have a full-time CFO, but still need help. So our focus is, again, either on working with CEOs who don't have a CFO, or if there is a CFO, we work for the CFO, and usually our clients are facing complex challenges of some sort of or another. With CEOs, we work on high-level strategy, growth planning, mergers and acquisitions, and we also get involved with execution of financial and other initiatives, the kind of things you'd expect your CFO to get involved in. And when we're working for the CFO, we usually work as an extension, or certainly start as an extension of the FP&A team, financial planning and analysis. We have a team with a lot of experience providing those services at both large and small companies. And we get involved in financial planning, profitability, forecasting, whatever it is that they need. And we work both with FP&A teams as well as the FP&A team. It really depends on the business. But again, when there's a CFO, that's usually where we play. I'll mention the two kind of companies that we work with, and then we'll wind this down. We typically work with either successful growing companies with 30 or more employees. The CEOs often, as you might understand why we have Caleb and CFAR here today, the CEO is often the second or third CEO at the company. So often it is not the founder. And sometimes someone purchased the business from a founder, and sometimes someone inherited the business from a founder. And I think we have at least one person today who works at a family business and is the hired CEO, who may not have purchased the business, but we may have more than one of those on the call today. By the way, you know who you are. I'm happy to shout you out if you want. Just send me a text. I'll give you a commercial. It's a fun business. And with CFOs, the companies are usually doing 100 million in revenue or more. And again, sometimes they have an FP&A team, sometimes they don't. I'm a big networker. That's how I met Sarah and Caleb. And I met some of the other people on this call through networking. So always looking to meet new people, always looking to meet new clients. If anyone wants to chat, you know how to get in touch with me. Look forward to being in touch with you all. That's a little bit about the company. My background is I've been involved in finance for a while, but the main thing is that we have an amazing team of CFOs who usually have 30 to 40 years of experience, and everyone on our team is really good at what they do. On to Caleb. Excited to have you guys here today. Caleb is, as some of you may have heard, involved in a sixth generation family business. And I think sounds like his day job is working as a consultant and advisor, or leading a consulting practice that deals with family businesses. And one of the things that they deal with, which we probably bump into but are not experts at dealing with, is the family type issues. So whether that involves how to have a life, how to communicate, and lots of other important things. Look forward to hearing more and being educated. So Caleb, thank you for joining.
Great, thank
you. Introduce yourself and take it away.
Great. Well, very excited to be here. Thank you very much, Gershon. I really want to emphasize that for me, the best outcome of today will be for this to be an interactive session where I'm able to respond to specific questions. I do have some prepared slides that might guide the conversation, but I'm very willing to go off script and make it really valuable to everybody who is on this webinar this morning. So I am going to share slides to get going here. Um, and I'm a thumbs up if you all can see that. All right, great. So, you know, let's see, why isn't it forwarding? That's not, oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. So, as Gershon said, I am actually perhaps the greatest credibility I have is that I've lived it. I am an owner of what's now a sixth generation, well, we're into our eighth generation of shareholders, family business, a company called Ensign Bickford Industries. My great grandfather started it in 1836, first in Simsbury, Connecticut, where its headquarters was until about 5 years ago, and we more recently moved our corporate headquarters to Denver. It's about 2,000 employees, and we have sort of three verticals today, which are explosives for the military and defense industry, uh, a separate vertical, which is pet food flavoring, and a third separate vertical, which is agricultural testing to see whether things have mycotoxins or GMO or non-GMO. Those businesses operate in 16 states and 10 countries. You know, fairly formidable business. I was CEO of that business for about 8 years from 2000. 8 to 2015. And most of the past 60 years, it has been led by non-family CEOs, and that's certainly the case again today. The business had been um, explosives for the mining industry, and it was when in 2003 we successfully sold that part of the business that the family really needed to come back together and say, well, you know, what do we want to do? And it was at that time that my 96-year-old great aunt said, well, Caleb, don't screw this thing up and let's get it to the eighth and ninth generation. So no pressure there, but that was my introduction into family business when I had been a banker and worked for BP overseas in London before coming back to the family business in the CEO capacity. Um, so a little bit about the firm that I joined now 8 years ago, which stands by the acronym CFAR today. At one point, it stood for the Center for Applied Research, and it is a spinoff of from Wharton. We spun off from Wharton UPenn Business School in 1987, prior to which it was the largest consulting arm within Wharton. And it was really at the intersection of strategy and finance and social science, or as we like to say, you know, on the one hand, we can do discounted cash flows and dissect a balance sheet, but at the same time, we're pretty good at dealing with dynamics, whether those be organizational dynamics of a nonprofit or a healthcare system, or of course, family dynamics. And today we have brick and mortar offices in Philadelphia and Boston. We have about 25 client-facing W-2 professionals who do consulting work. We have an executive coaching practice that my colleague, who's on the Zoom here today, Sarah Miller, is the director of. And we really have four verticals. The largest is owner-led or family businesses. We also do higher ed, healthcare, and nonprofit. So today I'm really going to be focusing on my area of expertise, which is family businesses, and I lead that practice as the market leader, but we've got quite a robust team, and that has been our fastest growing business, particularly the past 5 years, and many of you all on the Zoom today as CFOs can appreciate just how much wealth transfer is happening between the baby boomer generation and next generations. And I think that has been fueling a lot of the need for consultation across family businesses. So, again, while I want this to be interactive and I'll go where you all take me, generally, I see the objectives of today being, talking together about some of the issues and choices that impact family enterprises. And I'm going to use a model that's now been used, that's now over 40 years old and still is very relevant in the realm of family business consulting. And that's the three circles model. But that'll really, depending on the choices that people's make around family dynamic or around ownership dynamic or about management dynamic, you'll see how that model gets applied. I'll share a little bit of facts and trends about family businesses, and then I've put together at least three strategies to share with you that I think are sort of fundamental to how family businesses can at least give themselves a better survival rate when it comes to becoming a multi-generational family enterprise. And that is, something we do around strategy, which many a CFO gets involved with. Secondly, next generation development. We have a model and a framework for that. And lastly, both corporate and family governance and how important that has been. So I invite you, of course, to put any questions you might have along the way into the chat. And I know Brittany from Imperial will also be monitoring LinkedIn to make sure we get any questions that come in from the LinkedIn audience. Okay, so one of the things that we listen to and we're particularly attuned to not only our clients and prospects, but we often have peer groups and that we convene of family businesses. And what are some of the things that we hear become the top challenges? Here are just a few of them, and I of course invite those to add the things that you see. But certainly, one thing is that just fundamentally getting a succession plan in place is often a big hurdle for many in what we call the leading generation. Just addressing that sort of reality and putting a succession plan in place often is seen as questioning their own vitality, and so it's often very difficult to get started on that process, let alone even if a member of the leading generation, male or female, has that in their mind, having them share it or share it broadly is a very related challenge. At the other end of the spectrum is even when one has a succession plan that might be well scripted and say, all right, well, I'm going to pass the business on to X or Y in the next generation. One of the other challenges is maybe the next generation has absolutely no interest in it or partial interest, and engaging that next generation is also another challenge. And we'll all be spending quite a bit of time this morning on just ideas that we have on how to engage the next generation early on. Within the business, some of the challenges we see, particularly when it comes to generational evolution, is attracting and retaining talent, whether that talent, the talent that the business needs, whether that talent is from the family or the non-family. So there's the next generation and getting them interested, but there's also, maybe the best talent is non-family, but if their last name isn't, I don't know, Smith, and everybody in the family is being given the top, the Smith family is being given the top positions, that can often quickly have non-family talent leave unless the right kinds of things are put in place to retain them. And then if you do have a number of family members who come into the business, trying to really determine what roles there should be, what skills they need, what their pay scale, what their pay should be, and the pay criteria, that's often a very difficult situation. And sometimes the decision is made early on, or we're going to pay everybody the same, and that ends up being a difficult path forward because then the motivation isn't, you don't have a meritocracy to drive performance. In the family, often it's difficult educating all the stakeholders as the family grows about the business and fostering interest in it, and making them aware of the risks that the business might be facing and what kind of capital or funds are needed to make investments to keep the business relevant. And also, another challenge within the family is creating the glue that enables good communication and alignment. So that's one set of challenges we often hear from the peer groups that we have for family businesses, members of family businesses. And just going down the right side of the slide here, often when governance is put in place, whether that's bylaws or shareholders agreements or even boards, they don't evolve the way the business needs to, the way they don't evolve with the business and the business needs. So we'll be talking a bit about that going forward. Differing shareholder goals and liquidity needs is something that regularly comes up. Determining what, if any, board structure might make sense. Advisory board, fiduciary board, owner's board. That's often a question. And last two are ensuring communication and alignment between shareholders, the board, and management when you do have a board. And similar to the top bullet on this column, adjusting the governance to the transitions, but then adjusting the documentation. So I'm sure there's plenty of CFOs on the phone who have seen governance documents, but they are way outdated to what is needed for the business today. So let me just take a quick check on the chat, see if there's any questions. I don't see any yet, so I'll keep on going. But again, inviting you to, oh wait, here we go. Maybe there are. Okay.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Quick question. So you mentioned the issue of paying different people differently. Let's say that everyone was compensated enough that they were being fairly or overcompensated. So we're not talking about keeping everyone's salary low. Let's say all grandchildren who work in the business get paid $500,000 a year or $1 million a year, and the CEO doesn't need to make more than that. That's not, it's in line with that. Does that become like a jealousy thing? Like who is not motivated to do their job if they're being paid very well?
Yeah, that can often lead to a number of problems. We're actually facing it right now with they're not getting paid $500,000, but they're getting paid well above market, right? So the market for there are four members of the next gen in the business. The market for their salaries is, let's say, around $85,000 to $95,000, and they're all getting paid about $200,000, right? And
Right.
it does a couple of things. Number one is you have this, all right, well, the only people who are going to get this windfall are those who are working in the business, right? Whether they're capable to work in the business or not, right? So then versus, so then you have, let's say there are, in this case, there are four working in the next gen, working in the business next gens out of a total of six. So the two that are not working in the business, do they suddenly say, well, actually, it's a lot easier if I just decide to work in the business, even if I don't have a passion for the business or the requisite skill set. So that can create a problem. And then if you pay everybody equally, then why would people be motivated to take on more responsibility or get better credentials? So the problem is that by not setting up differential, it can lead to all sorts of, hey, I'm just gonna mail it in, right? And I'm just gonna see how long. So you really have to put some rigor into not only why you are paying them through the business this way. Now, this could be different than a dividend policy if you want to, if these next gens are going to be eventual, board members or shareholders or things like that. But it can be really fraught if you don't at least bring some market component and some some correlation between their responsibilities and their compensation.
Interesting. I was at a talk by Mitch Modell, a few years back, and he said that they had a policy in the business, not just it wasn't about paying, but it was about getting hired.
Hmm.
And their policy was you couldn't get hired until you had experience. And we're not going to let you ruin our business getting experience. So you had to go, like he worked at a competitor and he learned
Yep.
he's like, I messed up some catalog once and everyone showed up for 90% off. And instead of 10% off, he's like, I learned all that in someone else's dime. And then when I knew what
Yep.
I was doing, then I got a job and I earned
And
my
that
way up.
that is certainly one of the things that we typically recommend. This is outside of summer internships, which, I think are a great way to get the family members to learn about the business. But once they're sort of out of college, let's say, we certainly recommend 3 to 5 years working outside of the business so that they not only get that outside experience, but they actually have to work for a promotion is what we would want to see, where they're not just, because sometimes people say, all right, 3 to 5 years working outside, and they just sort of call up some other friend who's got a kid, and you know, I'll have you have your kid work for me for 3 years, and I'll have my kid work for you for 3 years, and it really doesn't achieve what you really want, which is some real self-identity achieved by the next gen member. Great,
Got it.
good question. Let me just see if there's anything else.
Thanks. Yeah, there's one question in the chat. What
Sure.
advice would you give to a family business that is at loggerheads with their board of directors if they have one?
Well, great question. And I guess in hindsight, the first thing I'd say is it's really important to set up regular communication, and we often advise an annual letter from the shareholders to the board, right? Now the board may have a few shareholders on it. So that's one way to provide linkage, but oftentimes that's not enough. So we first would say, ideally, before you get into that situation, what you want to do is you want to have something like an annual shareholder letter so that the board knows whether it's the risk appetite, the growth appetite, the liquidity needs are of the family, and how broad and wide there is around that family, those family goals, and is there alignment, so that they're incorporating them into how they work with management on developing strategy and allocating the resources of the business. So that's one thing. Once you're at the loggerheads, there is a question of whether it's an advisory board or a fiduciary board. um, I'd probably say the first thing to do is try to have a détente and see whether, the shareholders can share what their goals are, and see whether there's a path that the board can make with management to get more aligned with those shareholder goals. But if it's an advisory board, honestly, the shareholders don't need they can just fire the board. And even in a fiduciary board, it's their vote each year that is really how they can influence power, right? So, the voting shares, depending on whether they're very well dispersed or whether they're in control of just a few people, it really should be determining who is on that board or not. So there's a lot in that question. So please feel free to come back with a follow-up, because if but generally, one would try to make sure that the board is made aware of what the shareholder goals are, and that process in and of itself, we do a lot of that work, and oftentimes you find that the shareholders are all over the place. So just getting a sense for what are the shareholder goals and how aligned they are, and how aligned the goals are with where the voting and the economic interests lie, it can often be work. It's a lot easier if you're dealing with, 5 shareholders or something like that. But if you're dealing with 40 shareholders, just that work can be very challenging. And Gershon, I'm not sure where I should be seeing the chat, because I'm on. Oh, there it is. Okay. So if there's other questions, you let me know. All right.
Sure.
Okay. I don't see any right now, so I'll keep going. So just something to ground us a little bit are what are the numbers saying about family businesses? So while 80% of business owners have the desire to pass on their business to the next generation, um, 60 to 70% of family-owned businesses fail or are sold before the second generation takes over. And then when you sort of go out a few more generations, less than two-thirds survive the second generation, and only about 13% actually last through three generations. So I understand how lucky I am for us to be sixth generation myself, and for our family business to be in its eighth generation of shareholders. And I really attribute it to what the third generation did about 100 years ago in really setting up governance structures that really have enabled the company to flourish alongside the family. Um, and another thing that the data says is that creating an outside board, whether that's advisory or fiduciary, strongly correlates with improving company performance and in providing an outside perspective and mentorship during transitions. And that helps increase survival rates of family businesses. So that's why one of the things I'll be spending a bit more time on today is governance. So I promised,
Quick question.
yeah, sure.
On the topic of boards, I think we have two people here on the call who run companies that set up peer advisory boards.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with Vistage?
I'm very familiar with Vistage. Yep.
So
I was a member
not
of
this.
7 years.
So does something like that? I'll give them shout outs, by the way. Compel on Long Island and Tab on Long Island.
Yep.
Happy to have you both here. But are things like that similar, or do they achieve the same thing as what you're describing? Do they serve a different function?
No.
In my opinion, they serve a different function. I mean,
Yep.
but I'm a big advocate. They were hugely valuable for me when I was CEO of my family business. And one of the things that we'll regularly recommend, even alongside executive coaching, is that peer advisory group. So by all means, those who are on the webinar today, please reach out to me so we know, what the catchment area of your peer groups are, because we are big believers in peer groups for CEOs and the C-suite. But the reason I see them very differently is, I think those peer groups are great for working specific issues and for leadership to go to, because it's lonely at the top, right? And I think those are great conversations that are about, and in fact, those are good forums for CEOs to say, well, man, I just can't seem to get through to my board, right? Or I've got this big disconnect between my board and my family. So that's a great forum, particularly if there are, as I know there is in Vistage, there are even message boards that are dedicated to family business, right? But I see, really a board of advisors or a fiduciary board, they are really working with management to make sure that management and the CEO are the right leaders. They're working and helping pressure test the business strategy that's put forward, and as appropriate, they're providing resources and relationships that might be helpful to the business, particularly if if the business is earlier in its life cycle. So let me just keep plugging ahead. I know we've already gone through about a half an hour, but let me just give you a couple of frameworks that I think might be helpful for those here. So this is that three circles model framework that has been around for about 40 years, and we often refer to these as the three hats. There's the family hat that people have, the business hat, and the owner's hat. And if you sort of think about those in family businesses, right, they are certainly in one of the three circles. Maybe they start as a family member, but they don't have ownership yet. And so they move from the gray to the light blue as they become an owner. And then maybe, or maybe not, they end up going into the business that puts them smack dab in the very middle in the dark blue. Or maybe they are a family member and they're in the business, but they don't have ownership yet. So they're in the orange. So it's just a framework on which to think about what hat people are wearing. And the general guideline is the more you can create forms that keep the business issues separate from the family issues, separate from the ownership issues, the more successful you're going to be, knowing full well that there is overlap, right? And that's not, that's to be understood. Here, there's a bit of an eye chart, but generally speaking, when there are all sorts of different questions that emanate out of the different areas of the circle. In the upper left, I'm not going to go through all these, but what is the relationship of the family to the business? How is the family connected to each other? Down in the ownership bucket, it's, who owns the business, how are minority interest, what are the interest rights of minority interest owners? On the business side, and who runs the business? Is it family? Is it non-family? What are the criteria, as we were talking about before, to get into the business? And then up in the, what is the strategy? And we put this block at the top here, how to be fair to all of the next generation, while some may or may not be joining the business. That is a big question we often are faced with. Of all the work that CFAR does in this space, what I would say is that about 40% of the work we do is actually between the second generation and the third generation. And the model, one of the ways that's talked about in the family business consulting space is you've got the founder or controlling, this is your first generation, and then the sibling-owned businesses is sort of typically the G2 generation two, and then the cousin consortium is the third generation often, right? And I think one of the reasons so much of our business is managing the transition right here between the second and the third generation is a lot of sibling-owned businesses. They all grew up in the same household. They were used to seeing the founder, discuss the business, let's say at the dinner table, and they sort of were recruited early on as to what the values of the family were and how those spilled over into the business. Once you get to the cousin consortium, you had many of, they all grew up in different households, right? And with that difference, often the differences of values and the differences of liquidity needs and the differences of work ethic begin to show up. And so we do find that a lot of our work is trying to figure out how to evolve the governance and some of the family requirements going from second generation to third generation. Let me just see if there's any other questions. I'm not seeing any, Gershon, are you?
I have not noticed. Let me take a quick look. Nope, looks good.
Okay. So when it comes to, where, the kinds of things that come up when going from, from generation one to generation two to generation three, here are some of the typical questions that emerge. And again, a lot of our work then becomes trying to see where there's alignment and see where there are differences, and where there are differences, trying to create forums that either allow for those to be sort of discussed and remedied, or, if the right path is, hey, we need to buy out a branch, then sort of doing that in a way that is not too destructive to the business. So I said there were sort of three areas that we felt if you pay attention to these, it increases the survival likelihood. One is really getting alignment around strategy. One of the tools that we use is a strategy pyramid. And to give you with a 60-second version of this, and I'm sure many of the CFOs on the webinar today have used something similar or addressed something similar. We really view the strategy work as first figuring out where the business is competing and how it's going to win, right? And so the kinds of questions that we link to family businesses are, what is the guiding business for the business? What is the guiding vision for the business? And is it aligned with the vision and the values of the family, right?
Right.
And how do you do that? Was there a question?
Not easy.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And then going down here, how do you set goals? And we tend to set them 5 years out, making sure you understand what markets they're competing in. And then the big question of competitive advantages. When we're doing strategy work, we often find that what businesses and business owners and business management even feel are their competitive advantages really don't stand up to the pressure test. So you really have to figure out whether, when they say, oh, well, our customer service is better than anybody else's, is that really what the voice of the customer is saying? So we do a lot of work around strategy to sort of make sure that the business has a strong and robust and pressure tested business strategy, because everything else falls out from that. We're trying to keep the golden goose laying the golden eggs. And to do that, you need to make sure the business has the right resources to enable competitive advantage, which leads to the strategic imperatives. And then the strategic initiatives tend to be, what is the next 12 to 18 months look like? What are the strategic initiatives that will support the imperatives that support the advantages? So this is just a framework we use when doing strategy with some of our clients to, really first say, okay, what do you, we believe form follows function. So what's the function of the business and how is that tied to the family? Okay, let me
Is
just.
it always tied to the family? Could it be parallel to the family?
Well,
No.
I think it needs to be aligned with the shareholders, right? So almost to the question in that shareholder note before, it can be parallel, right? But if it gets too far afield for what the goals and the values of the family are, then the question becomes, is really this the best family to be owning the business? And then you often will get a real disconnect between what management might be driving if it's non-family management and what the family is feeling good about in terms of how they're, what they have their capital tied up in. I'm going to see if there are any questions in the chat here. Okay.
One question for you. I don't know if that was public. How do you guys find your clients?
Yeah, no, yeah. I think that's great that Lewis asked that question. So, we got a lot. I'd say generally fall into 3 or 4 buckets. A lot of it's from existing customers, clients. They know other family businesses, so word of mouth probably gets us a great deal of, at least 50% is from our, we've been doing this for about 40 years now, so we get a lot from referrals from family businesses. We also sponsor a few conferences. Family Business Magazine has a couple of conferences each year. The 2 that are called Transitions, dealing with all sorts of transitions in family businesses. One's in April in Florida, and the other one is in November out in California. A sister publication to Family Business Magazine is Corporate and Directors Magazine, or Directors and Boards Magazine, and they do a really great conference down in DC in May or June called the Private Company Governance Summit. And so we're a sponsor of those events. We get a speaking, role in that, and that's usually very ripe with potential family business clients. And then by working with, just like Gershon mentioned, he is a networker. I'm a big networker as well, and we talk to trust and estates attorneys. My colleague is down at Heckerling, which is the big trust and estates attorneys conference down in Orlando right now. And so trust and estates attorneys, even valuation firms, investment bankers. And you say, well, why would investment bankers talk to us? Well, the last thing they want is to get to the 11th hour of a transaction and only then find out that the family wasn't fully aligned around a transaction. So they might bring us in early on and say, listen, they might be 2 or 3 years away from a transaction, but could you help get the family aligned or figure out what needs to happen here in terms of their governance? Maybe it's helping them put a board in place to help the board get the momentum and the experience they need to help them get to a transaction. But those are the top 3 areas, I would say. Um, okay, so we've got about 18 minutes left. Please keep the questions coming. I'll keep on plowing forth with our sort of second framework here. And that is, really thinking about the next gen, and really understanding that the next generation needs to be prepared to migrate, let's say from one part of the circle into some of these other wedges. So we often begin by asking the question, well, first, what is the goal for the business? Is it continuity? Or is it just, progressing it to a sale? Because what you don't want to do is uh, get the next generation in for 10 or 15 years, and right when they're at the sort of key point in their careers to be able to earn the most or whatever, then have the leading generation where all the ownership is say, well, actually, what we want to do is we want to sell because that's our retirement. And then you've had 15 years for the next generation where they've been dedicated to the family business and now are having the family business sold out from under them. So we believe it or not, we've seen that happen because there's not alignment and there's not connection. Um, so let's see. It looks like a question may have come in. Yeah. So from Mike, can you expand on the big idea behind the vision competitive advantage of a business as it trickles down into the daily messages in the form of video ads, video content, social media? Um, yeah. So let me go back to that slide. You know, I would here's one thing I would say. Um, it's more important to have alignment, even if the strategy
I'm on a
might.
conference call, don't ding me.
Excuse me?
Turn it off.
Was there a question? Okay. Um, so I would say that rather it's more important to have alignment around a strategy and have that consistent from the board to management to the advertising to the video ads than it is to necessarily have 100% the right strategy. So we'll take, hey, if it's 80, 85%, the right strategy, or, maybe it's a little bit to the left of the bullseye or a little bit to the right of the bullseye. But my goodness, if you can get alignment from top to bottom, that'll win, right? That will win. So I'd rather focus on alignment, and that's around communication, that's around involvement of a lot of different stakeholders in the development of the strategy and a real um, conscious and deliberate communication strategy uh, around the once you've sort of formalized the strategy, how is it communicated? And one wants to make sure that with every year, this is a great time in January where goals are set. So how is the setting of goals, if there's not line of sight with the goal setting that's happening sort of at a given work cell, if it's a manufacturing business, or a given service area, if it's a professional services firm, and the goals of the firm, that's a real lost opportunity. So I do think the performance management systems that, again, many of the CFOs probably on this call are integrally involved with, making sure there's connection between the goal setting and the strategy. And then, when one of the questions we love to ask, and if you don't use, you guys should feel free to steal it from us. We often ask a business when we are doing interviews at all levels of an organization, how do you know if you're winning or losing, right? How do you know if you're winning or losing? And often we are met with, you know, blank faces, right? But it's because there hasn't been the connection between what their goals are and what the strategy is. So, bit of a long-winded answer, Mike, but hopefully that got to your question.
Can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah, please.
There's one thing I forgot to do at the beginning, which is I welcome all our guests, but I also like to acknowledge our team, especially the people who show their faces so I know who they are. So welcome Ken, who is my partner here at Imperial. Welcome Barry. Thank you for your participation as well. And welcome to all the rest of our team members. And welcome to Brittany. Thank you for putting this whole thing together. Caleb, back to you.
No, great. Glad you did that. And I'll quickly go over two other frameworks, and then I'll save, let's say 10 minutes for questions at the end here, okay? All
Perfect.
right. Um, so the second sort of idea with next generations, I'm going to skip over this slide and this slide. That's just sort of emphasizing that is a framework that we call heart, head, and hunger. But it's the idea of engaging the next generation early on, making sure that that they understand that they are developed, whether they get a coach, whether they go through, let's say Briggs-Myers behavioral assessments, or we use predictive index, which those of you who are in Vistage might be quite familiar with predictive index. But there's DISC is one that we've seen a lot of families. But how do you really help them develop, whether they're developing those skills for just life or for the business, and then really thinking very deliberately about what does deployment in the family business look like? To the conversation Gershon and I were having earlier, is that something that happens after 3 to 5 years working elsewhere? How do you take advantage of internships early on? What does that look like? So we sort of use this engage, development, deployment framework, and there are roles that need to be taken not only by the next generation, but the leading generation needs to be thinking, well, what am I trying to accomplish by in this interaction with the next generation? So we will often work on plans around engagement, development, and deployment. That could be rotational programs through that might last as long as 2 years through areas of the business. And one of the things we insert ourselves in is we're the ones often talking with the next generation supervisor, because it's so difficult for those who are in a business, let's say they're not family members, and they're now supervising a family member, to really give an honest assessment to, let's say, about the next gen, when they know that mom or dad are going to hear about that. So the final framework, I'm just skipping over these. For the final framework, we just like to share. I'm going to really jump to this is the way we view governance, right? So, there's the business of the family, and there's governance structures that really can help govern the business of the family, and then there's the business of the business. So many of those on the webinar today certainly know about the business of the business, which is shareholder meetings, boards of directors, and how they interact with the CEO. And this line here sort of gets to the kind of shareholder letter that I was talking about before, that might come from the family council on an annual basis to the board of the directors, and by the family members of the family attending the shareholder meetings. That's also another opportunity for them to raise questions and get educated. Certainly, we in my family business, we not only have an annual shareholder meeting, but we then make a point to have shareholder dinners once a week, not once a week, once a year, where we're making a concerted effort by management to go out to where the bulk of our shareholders are, and make sure that there's a more informal setting for there to be an exchange. And that's really how the shareholder point of view and voice is understood. On the business of the family, there are structures, whether it's a family council or a family assembly, that really help govern the family, and keep them aligned and united and educated. Oftentimes, that is punctuated by an annual family meeting, by a lot of work on estate planning, so that they're doing estate planning together, and those kinds of things. So those were the key frameworks that we wanted to share with you, and I'll leave you with just when we think about the 5 essentials to sustaining a multi-generational family business. Number 1, engaged and responsible owners who are lifelong learners. Number 2, alignment around maintaining the business as an attractive long-term investment and providing path to liquidity for some shareholders. So it's really thinking about the resources to the strategy pyramid I showed before, that the business needs to remain an attractive investment, but also understanding what is going on with the shareholders in terms of their estate tax needs, et cetera. Number 3, focusing on attracting and retaining talent, for both the management part of the business as well as the governance structures like the board. Well-structured and functioning governance that evolves as needed. And lastly, communication between a lot of different stakeholders here: family, owners, the board, management, all employees, and as appropriate, communities. So let me stop there in terms of slides, see whether I can get any more questions to make sure it's good use of your time. Or, of course, Gershon, if you have anything that is, that you think that would be useful for this group, by all means.
I kind of asked my questions throughout the talk, but let's see if anyone else has any questions. If not, I'm sure I'll have a
Brittany, is
couple
there
more.
anything from the LinkedIn group?
There is nothing on LinkedIn.
Okay.
There is one question from Mike in the comments.
Is that a new one, or is that the one that Mike we had before? Oh, here we go. Lewis is asking. Do you advise family-owned businesses if diversification is needed? Yeah, that's a great question. So we are not financial advisors, right? So what we don't go into the realm of being of telling them, what part of their portfolio should be, X or Y. We are good at business strategy. So what we will do is we will look and help them develop a good business strategy. And oftentimes that could lead to something that's more of a holding company strategy. So we have sort of advised that, like for my family business, we feel one of the justifications we have for shareholders to be able, because we're sort of a mini conglomerate: pet food, aerospace and defense, and then agricultural, right? Pretty different drivers there. So we've provided some portfolio diversification across our business segments. But certainly there are businesses that don't have even the least bit of diversification. So it does beg the question, well, should part of the dividend policy bear in mind that the shareholders need a diversified portfolio? But so I think it comes really in the realm of, what does the business need to be a really viable business? How much extra cash flow might be generated? And then in terms of the dividend policy, we do get at what are the shareholder goals? And if some of the shareholder goals are diversification, and that's what they're hearing perhaps from a financial advisor, we get into it there. But one of the things we do, and we have our own bias, I suspect here, we do at least make our family business clients aware of, is you have many wealth managers who will look at the concentration and the illiquidity risk of a privately held business, and they will often recommend, hey, as soon as you have a chance to sell out of that business, you should, because you've got both the illiquidity risk and the concentration risk. And maybe that makes sense, but if you look at some really, there's an expression that many of you have heard, is concentration is how wealth is created and diversification is how wealth is maintained. That's so the question is, can the concentration really achieve the kind of wealth and under whose ownership? So I'm not sure that was a super clear answer, but at least that's some thoughts on that, Lewis.
All right. Any further questions? All right. So thank you all for joining us. You know how to get in touch with us. If anyone would like an intro to Caleb, please reach out to Brittany or myself. We'll make sure to make that intro. If anybody here would like to speak to us, networking, talking business, reach out to us on that as well. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Sarah.
Enjoyed it very
Thank
much.
you, Brittany. And have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.